Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we are continuing a series that I started years ago and then went on hiatus, where I read through the entirety of the Dungeon Master's Guide from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This book is a masterpiece, and it is one of the most fascinating artifacts from early D&D, and it is incredibly long and complex, and almost no one reads through the whole thing, and I thought that maybe I should do that, just to get some background and get a deeper understanding of the roots of original Dungeons & Dragons. When last we left off, we were about to begin Underwater Adventures, which goes into Gary's rules for running stuff underwater, which is famously something that doesn't happen very often. People do not do a lot of underwater adventures, so I'm very curious to see how Gary envisioned that happening. Before we jump into that, though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Realms of El Grun, a science fantasy RPG system set on a dungeon planet. Its rules feature simple mechanics, punishing combat, and a perk system that allows for detailed character customization. Combat uses an opposed roll system, which I think is really fun, and you can upgrade your attack and defense rolls by collecting better loot that you find in the Infinite Dungeon. One of my favorite things about it is the art, which as you can see here is just wildly entertaining and goes full gonzo. The project has already been fully funded, and their backer kit store will be going live soon. So go check out their website now using the link below. All right, Underwater Adventures. As all readers of fantasy know, the ocean floor is home to numerous ancient submarine civilizations and dark green realms of creatures half man and half fish. Your players may have heard tales of the mountains of sunken loot that have been collected down there over the centuries, of such things as pearls the size of a man's head, beautiful mermaids with green eyes and blue skin. If they should find some way to investigate these stories, how will you handle it? This section deals with the methods of conducting underwater scenarios. Breathing, probably the most important thing you need to know. The first major concern in underwater adventures is breathable air. Magic users have the advantage in this area as they have access to several spells that can solve the problem of submarine respiration. These include water breathing, which is also a druidical spell, airy water, shape change, or even wish, which might be made to work for the whole party. Illusionists would use alter reality. They can also polymorph others into forms that can breathe water. However, most non-magic users will probably find the use of magic items or potions safer and more reliable. These include potions of water breathing, or items like the Helm of Underwater Action, or the Cloak of the Manta Ray, which help in movement as well as respiration. The DM may also find it expedient to create such things as air pills, or seaweed herbs that confer the temporary power to breathe water when ingested. Most methods of underwater breathing are of limited duration, so most submarine adventures will be similar to dungeon adventures as regards time actually spent underwater. Players will have to get to their destination, accomplish their mission, and return in a matter of turns rather than days or weeks, as in other outdoor adventures. If extended campaigns are desired, the DM will have to ensure that the players can acquire some sort of equipment or comestible, not sure what that word is, that will allow them to stay underwater for an unlimited time. So right away, that's really interesting in that because being underwater is not natural for most PCs, that's going to create an inherent time pressure for these types of adventures. And he links that to dungeon crawling, which generally has torches and random encounters as well as the time pressure that is put on the players. Having long-term underwater adventures is probably not something that's going to happen a whole lot in Gary's view. All right, movement. There are two possible modes of movement underwater: swimming and walking. Swimming is not possible in any type of armor heavier than leather, except magic armor, or when encumbered with more than 200 pounds of equipment of any type. Add or subtract 1 pound for each 100 gold pieces worth of strength bonus or penalty. Though submersion in water makes everything weigh less due to buoyancy, actual mass of equipment is unchanged, and some density that causes the illusion of less weight also causes a resistance to movement that slows it down considerably. Therefore, movement, either swimming or walking, is the same as the speeds used in dungeons, even though underwater movement is quote-unquote outdoors. Average movement is a function of encumbrance in exactly the same ratio as dungeon movement. So that's interesting. So basically the buoyancy of water doesn't significantly help you. Persons able to swim due to lack of encumbrance, not innate natatorial ability, that's a fun word, Gary breaking out the thesaurus again, will be able to move vertically as well as horizontally, and at the same rate of speed. Remember that swimming persons are vulnerable to attack from every direction. Characters encumbered with more than about 20 pounds of gear will be forced to walk on the floor of the ocean, lake, river, or whatever. They will have to negotiate underwater hills, coral outcroppings, shipwrecks, seaweed forests, etc. in the normal manner, i.e. they will have to go around or through them. Characters equipped with a Ring of Free Action or other magic item that confers the same power will be able to move normally and cover distance as if in the wilderness, that is, 3 times dungeon rate. Vision. Distance of vision will vary according to depth, available light, and obscuring objects. Basically, characters will be able to see objects and movement up to 50 feet away in fresh water and 100 feet away in salt water. That's interesting. I didn't know that there was that big of a difference in fresh versus salt water. Is Gary making that up? Is that a real thing? I don't know enough to know. Below this depth, vision will be obscured. You may wish to vary the distance as a function of depth to make this slightly more accurate, so that characters in fresh water could see 50 feet at a depth of 10 feet, 40 feet at a depth of 20 feet, and so on in segments of 10 feet until vision is 1 foot at 60 feet of depth. The same formula would apply to salt water, starting with 100 feet of distance at 10 feet of depth. Use of a light spell would allow vision up to 30 feet distance regardless of depth, or add 10 feet of vision to any distance shorter than 60 feet, whichever is greater. The visual capability of a Helm of Underwater action will quintuple normal vision as pertains to both distance and length. Infravision and ultravision are useful underwater, and their distance limits are the same as in dungeon settings. There will be some problems, however. Infravision users may become confused due to shifting currents and layers of different temperatured water, as water exchanges heat more slowly than air and therefore is of a less even temperature. Distance of ultravision is halved at 100 feet and reduced to 0 below 200 feet, as ultraviolet light does not penetrate beyond that depth in sufficient quantities for sight. For people who don't know, infravision is basically the ability to see infrared light, and ultravision lets you see ultraviolet light. This is a whole system that was in AD&D. I go into it more depth in my video on the history of dark vision, if you want to look that up, because the way that he did dark vision, or the way that dark vision was sort of envisioned in D&D, changed from edition to edition in a kind of interesting way. All right, continuing here. Other objects will also obscure vision. Seaweed or sea grass will reduce vision to 10 feet, or perhaps nil for those within it, depending on its density. Sea grass can be anywhere from 3 feet to 30 feet in height, while seaweed can take practically any size or shape the DM desires. In any case, shoals of either will totally obstruct vision, and anything may be hiding within schools of fish, Schools of fish can also blind and confuse their masses and quick movements. Mud can also be a big problem, especially as pertains to combat on the bottom, where violent movement may kick it up in great clouds, totally blocking vision as long as the movement lasts and for 7 to 12 rounds afterwards, unless there is a current to carry it away. Even light sources cannot penetrate the muddiest water. Combat. Underwater combat is difficult for normal land-born creatures or characters. Due to water's resistance, effective use of crushing or cleaving weapons will not be possible. Only thrusting weapons will be of any use. This means spears, tridents, daggers, stabbing weapons, etc. Human types will also be somewhat slowed underwater, so aquatic creatures will always get the first chance to hit, unless the human is armed with a significantly longer weapon than the opponent. Only those characters with free action ability, from a ring, helm, or otherwise, will be able to move as if above water. They can use any type of weapon they would normally use, and they receive no reaction penalty. Nets will prove useful as an adjunct to thrusting weapons underwater, especially if both of the combatants are swimming. There are several ways nets could be used. 2 or more characters could stretch a large net between them and foul up attackers and combatants by maneuvering it so that their opponents become entangled therein. This is most effective versus charging or unsuspecting opponents, who will have less chance of avoiding it. Nets wielded single-handedly in combat must be weighted. As the net is thrown, it is given a slight horizontal spin. The spin causes centrifugal force to move the weighted ends out, which keeps the net open and untangled. If thrown correctly, it will slow and stop spinning as it arrives at its target, the weights then pulling the net down over the victim. Nets can be thrown 1 foot for every point of the thrower's strength. Underwater races can throw nets an average of 15 feet. Saguagan. I know there's a proper way of saying that. I've just never been able to figure it out. 20 feet. Weighted nets can also be dropped upon non-swimmers on the ocean floor to drag them down or incapacitate them. Some battle nets have little hooks or barbs attached at every intersection to ensure that targets will be unable to escape easily. All of the underwater races use nets, especially aquatic elves, Lokatha, and mermen. The most adept of all are the Saguagan. That's that name again. They will often set ambushes involving many small nets or one huge net several hundred feet in diameter. These may be concealed in seaweed or left floating near the surface, disguised as something else. The creatures are masters of combat network as well. Combat network. Not sure what that means. And will often fight with a net in one hand to entangle and confuse, and a short jabbing trident in the other. The underwater combat net is a difficult weapon to use, and player characters who attempt it will do so at -4 to hit, unless they undergo extensive training and choose the underwater net as a weapon of proficiency. Such training must take place underwater. Except for certain specially made crossbows, use of missile weapons is generally impossible underwater. Special crossbows, which will function underwater, can be made by knowledgeable bowyers for 10 times the normal price. Effective underwater range of these will be 1/2 normal dungeon distances. If characters intend to go somewhere where normal missile weapons could be of use, like the great air-filled domes of Atlantis, bows and missiles must be kept dry. This is doubly true of such things as scrolls and books, of course. Spell use underwater will be limited to the same ranges and distances as in dungeons. In addition, there are problems with spell preparation, as many material components will be altered by or will not work correctly underwater. Some spells will be altered in effects as well. Fire-based spells, such as Fireball, will not function at all underwater, except within the radius of a airy water spell. That's a fun idea. So you could combine spells together, create an airy water area, and then throw a fireball into it. Electrical spells will be conducted to the entire surrounding area. A lightning bolt will behave as a fireball, etc. As Dungeon Master, you can alter whatever spell preparations or effects you deem necessary and reasonable. Well, I don't know how many people are actually tracking spell components, but imagine with all the different spells that especially a medium to high level wizard would use, and all the different components that come with that, tracking which of those are affected by water and which ones aren't would be a real nightmare. I kind of doubt a lot of people really track that. Underwater spell use. The following spells cannot be cast or will not function underwater. Cleric. 3rd level, Speak with Dead. 4th level, Lower Water or Speak with Plants. 5th level, Atonement and Flame Strike and Insect Plague. 6th level, Aerial Servant. 7th level, Control Weather and Windwalk. For the Druids, 1st level, Predict Weather. 2nd level, Fire Trap. Heat Metal, though its reverse, Chill Metal, will work, and Produce Flame. 3rd level, Call Lightning, Pyrotechnics, Summon Insects. 4th level, Animal Summoning 1, Call Woodland Beings, Produce Fire. 5th level, Animal Summoning 2, Control Winds, Insect Plague, Pass Plant, and Wall of Fire. 6th level, Animal Summoning 3, Conjure Fire Elemental, Fire Seeds, and Weather Summoning. 7th level, Chariot of Sustar, Control Weather, Creeping Doom, and Firestorm. For magic users, the spells that aren't going to work underwater are, for the 1st level, Affect Normal Fires and Burning Hands and Find Familiar. 2nd level, Pyrotechnics. 3rd level, Fireball, Flame Arrow, Gust of Wind. 4th level, Fire Charm, Fire Shield. Hot Flame, the Cold Flame version of this spell will still function. Fire Trap, Wall of Fire, Distance Distortion. I wonder why that wouldn't work underwater. Some of these are a little bit Curious. 6th level, control weather, guards and wards, and lower water. 7th level, so some of these, if they have an asterisk, then some of these will work in an airy water area. 4th level, fire charm, fire shield. Oh wait, I did that one already. Skip down here. 6th level, control weather, guards and wards, and lower water. 7th level, Cacodemon and delayed blast fireball. 8th level, incendiary cloud, polymorph any object. 9th level, meteor swarm. For the illusionist, the ones that won't work are for 1st level, wall of fog. 3rd level, illusionary script. And 7th level, 1st level magic user spells, affect normal fires, and burning hands. The effects of the following spells will be substantially altered when cast underwater. This is the sort of thing I find a bit more interesting. For clerics, 6th level, part water. The spell can be used to form a tunnel through deep water, no wider than 10 feet in diameter. 7th level, earthquake. Effects are as follows. Terrain. Underwater causes shock waves, stunning all within range who fail to save versus death magic for 5 to 20 rounds. Druids, 7th level, conjure earth elemental. An earth elemental conjured underwater will have to stay in the sea, lake, or river floor from which it was conjured, and cannot venture into the water. However, it may still assault creatures or constructions resting on or in the ground. So it just has to stay basically anchored to the floor. For magic users, 3rd level, fly. This spell will enable the recipient to swim easily in any depth desired, even if encumbered or normally too heavy to float. Maximum speed 9 inches. 9 inches meaning on an actual board. I think generally in AD&D an inch represented 10 feet if you were in a dungeon. Lightning bolt. Underwater, this spell resembles a fireball as pertains to area of effect. Instead of a stroke, the electrical discharge takes the form of a 2-inch radius sphere, so I guess probably a 20-foot radius sphere, centering on the point where a stroke would originate were the spell cast above water. All those within this sphere will suffer the full effect. Saving throw indicates 1/2 damage. 4th level, Ice Storm. The icy hail formed by this spell will be very large but weak in downward force, inflicting only 1 to 10 hit points of damage before floating to the surface. Sleet will melt instantly and will have no effect. Wall of Ice. A wall of ice can be formed underwater, but it will immediately float to the surface and bob about like an ice flow. So that's actually interesting, because if you create ice, of course it floats in water. There's interesting shenanigans you could get up to with that, right? Creating ice underneath you could very rapidly lift you up to the surface or lift enemies up to the surface. That's kind of interesting. 5th level, conjure elemental. Air and fire elementals cannot be conjured underwater at all. Earth elementals work as above. There's no problem with conjuring water elementals, of course. Oteluk's Freezing Sphere. This spell is extremely dangerous to the caster if invoked in its first manifestation while submerged. The globe of absolute zero matter, when formed underwater, will instantly freeze the water around the caster into a block of ice of a volume equal to 50 cubic feet per level of the caster. This will last a number of rounds equal to the level of the caster. Unless immediate aid is forthcoming, the magic user will suffocate. The ice-entombed magic user will immediately float to the surface, of course. Part water. The 6th level clerical spell, part water, works the same way. Next section is Travel in the Known Planes of Existence, which is a definitely fun title. I like how the water rules didn't go on forever, although they are way more extensive than I think a normal person would actually use. I believe I mentioned this before in previous videos on this topic, but Gary did not actually use these rules. All the stories I've heard from people who have played with him show that he basically used a stripped down version of original D&D with a lot of house rules put onto it. These sorts of rules were initially intended to be a kind of gigantic world simulator that you could use to resolve any disputes, especially in tournaments for AD&D. So if you weren't in that context, they probably weren't going to come up. Although a lot of people would just use it as reference, so that if you're in a weird situation and you want an idea for a ruling, you could look it up in here, and there's probably going to be something that Gary says about it, although it might take you a while to find. All right, travel in the known planes of existence. The known planes of existence, as depicted in Appendix 4 of the Player's Handbook, offer nearly endless possibilities for AD&D play, although some of these new realms will no longer be fantasy as found in sword and sorcery or myth, but verge on that of science fiction, horror, or just about anything else desired. How so? The known planes are part of the multiverse. A very early instance of the word multiverse there, although I believe it was first created in the Elric books by Michael Moorcock. And the prime material planes are countless suns, planets, galaxies, universes. So too, there are endless parallel worlds. What then of the outer planes? Certainly they can be differently populated, if not substantially different in form. Spells, magic devices, artifacts, and relics are known ways to travel to the planes. You can add machines or creatures, which will also allow such travel. As far as the universe around your campaign world goes, who is to say that it is not possible to mount a rock and fly to the moon or moons? Or perhaps to another planet? Again, are the stars actually suns at a distance? Or are they the tiny lights of some vast dome? The hows and wherefores are yours to handle, but more important is what is on the other end of the route. For those of you who haven't really thought about it, the so-called planes are your ticket to creativity, and I mean that with a capital C. Everything can be absolutely different, save for those common denominators necessary to the existence of the player characters coming to the plane. Movement and scale can be different, so can combat and morale. Creatures can have more or different attributes. As long as the player characters can somehow relate to it all, then it will work. This is not to say that you are expected to actually make each and every plane a totally new experience, an impossibly tall order. It does mean that you can put your imagination to work on devising a single extraordinary plane. For the rest, simply use AD&D with minor quirks, petty differences, and so forth. If your players wish to spend most of their time visiting other planes, and this would come to pass after a year or more of play, then you'll be hard-pressed unless you rely upon some other game system to fill in the gaps. Herein I recommend Boothe Hill and Gamma World to be used in campaigns. There is also Metamorphosis Alpha, Tractics, and all sorts of other offerings which can be converted to man-to-man role-playing scenarios. While as of this particular writing, there are no commercially available other planes modules, I'm certain that there will be soon. It is simply too big of an opportunity to pass up, and the need is great. This whole section on the outer planes and all of these different realms of existence basically exist so that Gary can say that you can have as much creativity as you want, as long as you don't leave this kind of AD&D setting that I've created, which is a bit of a change from what we've seen in original Dungeons & Dragons, the very first, 0th edition, where he is much more open about this being your game, do whatever you want with it. In this, even though he wants to keep that, he still wants to restrain it to AD&D specifically. So he's like, oh, I've created a multiverse, and as long as you set it there, then you'll be good. So it's just part of the whole two Garys phenomenon, where he changed his tune quite a bit, at least in professional settings, between the 0th edition and this first edition. All right, let's continue here. Astral and ethereal travel are not difficult, as the systems for encounters and the chances for the hazards of the psychic wind and either an ether cyclone are but brief sections of Appendix C, random monster encounters, easily and quickly handled. Other forms of travel, the risks and hazards thereof, you must handle as you see fit. For example, suppose that you decide that there is a breathable atmosphere which extends from the Earth to the Moon, and that any winged steed capable of flying fast and far can carry its rider to that orb. Furthermore, once beyond the normal limits of Earth's atmosphere, gravity and resistance are such that speed increases dramatically, and the whole journey will take but a few days. You must then decide what will be encountered during the course of the trip. Perhaps a few new creatures in addition to the standard ones, which you deem to be between the Earth and the Moon. Then comes what conditions will be like upon Luna, and what will be found there, why, and so on. Perhaps here is where you place the gateways to yet another worlds. In short, you devise the whole schema just as you did the campaign, beginning from the dungeon and environment and environs, outward into the broad world, in this case the universe, and then the multiverse. You need do no more than your participants desire, however. If your players are quite satisfied with their normal campaign setting, with occasional side trips to the layers of the abyss or whatever, then there is no need to do more than make sketchy plans for the eventuality that their interests will expand. In short, the planes are there to offer whatever is needed in the campaign. Use them as you will. Our next section is outdoor movement. As the scale of maps will differ from campaign to campaign, general movement rates are given, and you can adapt them to the scale of your campaign maps accordingly. Some variation in movement rate is justifiable, but the distances shown should neither be increased or decreased substantially. We have some tables here. Movement afoot in miles per day, so whether the terrain is normal, rugged, or very rugged, and what your burden is, or how far you can go. So in the best conditions, you can go 30 miles a day. In the worst, you can only go 2. And then same sort of thing, we have a table here for how far you can go when you're mounted. Light burden assumes an average man traveling with no more than 25 pounds of additional weight in food, weapons, and other equipment. Average burden assumes an average man traveling with from 26 to 60 pounds of gear of all sorts. Heavy burden assumes an average man with more than 60 pounds of gear, but less than 90 pounds. Adjust all weight assumptions by strength and race factors. Normal terrain assumes basically open ground, scrub, typical deserts, light forest, low hills, small watercourses, etc. With respect to vehicular movement, it assumes roadways through such terrain or smooth fields, steppes, plains, etc. Rugged terrain assumes rough ground, snow, forests, steep hills, large watercourses, etc. With respect to vehicular movement, it assumes either roadways through such terrain or tracks, paths through normal terrain. Very rugged terrain assumes broken ground, deep snow and ice, heavy forests, marshy ground, bogs, bluffs, mountains, and broad watercourses. Note, you must determine for yourself which terrain areas are impassable to mounted movement or any normal travel. Generally, large swamps and high mountains fall into this category. There's a table here for movement when you're afloat, oared, or sculled in miles per day, going by different vessel types and the type of terrain that you're in. So, for example, a warship can go 20 miles per day in the open sea, but only 10 miles per day in a lake. Maybe because windy conditions are different. It's not really spelled out. And the same thing, we have movement afloat, sailed in miles per day. I guess this is one for sailing. So this one's going to depend more on wind. And this one's just in when you're just oaring or just, using manpower to move around. Lake. A lake assumes a large body of water, at least 2 to 3 miles broad and several times as long, minimum. Marsh assumes a shallow body of water overgrown with aquatic vegetation, but with considerable open channels. This does not include a bog, but does include swamps. River assumes a body of water at least 3 times as wide as the vessel afloat upon it is long. That is, the smallest river is at least 40 feet wide. And navigatable to the vessel considered, usually because of familiarity and or piloting. For current effect, subtract its speed times 8 from movement when moving upriver, adding this same factor to movement for traveling for downriver travel, unless navigational hazards disallow, in which case adjust to the multiplier of 2 to 4 times current accordingly. Sea and ocean movement assumes generally favorable conditions. It is not possible to herein chart ocean currents, prevailing winds, calms, or storms, for these factors are peculiar to each milieu. Currents will move vessels along their route at their speed. Prevailing winds will add or subtract their movement somewhat, 10% to 30%, depending on direction of travel as compared to winds. Calms will slow sailed movement to virtually nil. Storms will have a likelihood of destroying vessels according to the strength of the storm and the type and size of the vessel. To simulate these effects during long voyages, reduce the movement rates shown by a variable of 5% to 20%. Stream assumes a body of water under 40 feet in width. The effects of currents are the same for river movement. For a description of vessel types, see Waterborne Adventures. Our next section is infravision and ultravision, something that I talked a little bit about in, again, the video that I made specifically on these things, but we're going to get into more detail here. Infravision. As explained in Player's Handbook, infravision is the ability to see light waves in the infrared spectrum. Characters and various creatures with infravisual capability out to 60 feet, standard, are basically picking up radiation from their surroundings. Therefore, they hate differences. They note differences in thermal radiation, hot or cold. They do not see things which are the same temperature as their surroundings. Thus, a room in a dungeon might look completely blank, as walls, floor, and ceiling, and possibly even some wooden furniture within are all the same temperature. Openings in the wall would show up rather plainly, as space anywhere else will, and if you are generous, you can allow different substances to radiate differently, even at the same temperature, i.e. the wood in the example above would be discernible if care was used in scanning the room infravisually. Note that air currents might show as cold or warm layers. Except where very warm or very cold objects are concerned, vision of this sort is roughly equal to human norm on a dark and cloudy night at best. Note that monsters of a very cold or very warm sort, such as a human, can be tracked infravisually by their footprints. Such tracking must occur within 2 rounds of their passing, or the temperature difference where they had trodden will dissipate. Light sources which give off heat are absolutely prevalent. Let me try that again. Light sources which give off heat are absolutely prevent normal infravision from functioning within their sphere of illumination. Explain this as the effect of trying to see into the dark when the character is in a brightly lit area. It requires not less than 2 segments to accustom the eyes to infravision after use of normal vision. Creatures with infravision capability of unusual nature, such as those which see infravisually to 90 feet, are actually emitting infrared radiation from their eyes and seeing what is within this visual range by receiving the reflected radiation. Such creatures can easily distinguish floor, ceiling, wall, and other areas, as well as furnishing within an area. The eyes of all such creatures will appear as very brightly glowing red when observed by any other creature with standard infravision. Most monsters inhabiting underground areas will have this form of infravision. So a fun thing about that, it explains the whole fantasy trope of monsters having glowing red eyes. Right? So in this, there's an actual function for that. It's them giving off radiation to see in the dark. Infravision outdoors enables the individual to see figures which are warm or cold at 100 to 300 feet, depending on temperature extremes. Vision is otherwise equal to a bright, starry night with full moonlight. Ultravision. Ultravision is the ability to see radiation above violet in the normal visible spectrum. Unless this ability is of highly unusual nature, so as to be able to see far into the spectrum, ultravision will not be useful underground, where radiation is screened out. Without some sort of ultravisual emanation. Magic weapons which shed illumination spoil ultravisual capability, just as heat does infravision. As noted in Player's Handbook, ultravision enables the viewer to see outdoors at night as if he or she were in twilight, so vision extends clearly for about 100 yards, dimly to about 300. In particularly cloudy nights, ultravisual capability is reduced to about half normal, i.e. clear sight to 50 yards, dim to 150 yards. Our next section is on invisibility. Now I'll sneak up on the monster invisibly. How often has this cry rung forth from eager players in your campaign? How often have you cursed because of it? Never fear, there are many answers to the problem of invisibility, and most difficulties will be resolved after you read the following rules and suggestions regarding the subject. So here we have it's Gary telling you how to mess with your players, basically, and how to nullify creative solutions, which is not a great way to run a game as far as I'm concerned. If the players find a way to make themselves invisible, then that should be awesome for them, and they should have a huge advantage as long as they are invisible. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to have invisibility forever. If you have like a ring that makes you permanently invisible, and as soon as other people figure that out, they're probably going to want to take the ring from you, and you're going to get into other shenanigans. But you probably shouldn't downplay a really powerful, fun ability like that, at least in my opinion. Invisibility is not what most players desire it to be. It is neither a soundproofing nor an odor preventative. Normal sound issues from the invisible creature, just as normal odors do. Monsters might well be able to hear, smell, or see the invisible character. How would they be able to see them? I guess maybe if they're using heat vision, maybe that's what it helps with. Furthermore, the associates of the invisible party are not able to see him or her in any better than foes are, and this can cause problems too. Now consider a silent spell and large area invisibility cast upon a party. Imagine the chaos within the area as characters stub their toes on the heels of the person before them, with the inability to hear anything, so that falls, suggestions as to what should be done, or orders cannot be heard. Consider also that dust on the floor will betray most invisibility, as will dust or powder in the air. Think of a door opening without any visible cause. This will cause suspicion in the minds of the viewer, particularly when the surroundings are taken into account. You bet it will. Or will this happen? You bet it will. Some of these are reasonable, I think. I mean, if the players are opening doors and monsters see the door opening, of course, they'll be suspicious. Stuff like trying to figure out if the players are stepping on each other's toes when they're all invisible seems a lot less plausible as something that you would have to try and keep track of as a dungeon master. Invisibility spells are broken when attack occurs. But what about devices? Becoming invisible takes but a twinkling, but if the party is observed doing so, there's no reason why an opponent cannot attack with the standard penalty, -4, for inability to see the target. Likewise, becoming invisible takes only a second, but thereafter the foe is able to clearly observe the attacker for a return of the compliment, as it must be assumed that it requires a full round to again activate the magic, which enabled the character to be non-visible. Invisibility to animals. The first level druid spell does not allow attack, but is pretty well proof against stupid animals. Invisibility devices generally duplicate the spell or else make the user likely to be undetected that turn or round. Indetectability being stated as a percentage chance. And this part is in all bold or all caps. Check each period as applicable under the situation. Dust of disappearance does not negate a sound or odor either, as it basically is the same as an invisibility spell, which allows invisible attack. Psionic invisibility is a mind control ability. The Shadow knows. That's a reference to an old radio serial, The Shadow, who was a kind of superhero who skulked around in the shadows and fought crime, which is more similar to the druidic invisibility to animals. For the affected creatures, does not notice sounds or odors from the psionic. Note, however, that this form of invisibility is sharply limited in that it works only on a set maximum number of creatures according to their combined levels / hit dice. In no event is the thief ability to hide in shadows to be treated as the same as invisibility as regards disappearance. See character classes' thief abilities for further details. Finally, we have the consideration of the ability to detect invisible creatures, even though they are not actually seen. This is explainable as the observer's ability to note a minor disturbance in the air, a shimmering or haze by keen hearing, or a keen sense of smell. The table below gives the probability of detection of invisibility according to level or hit dice. Then we have a table here showing the detection of invisibility chance. So if you're a higher level creature, and especially if you have higher intelligence ability, then you have a percentage chance of noticing that a character is invisible, even if they're just not doing anything that would give them away. So this could be as high as 95% for very high level creatures with very high intelligence. It says, note, you may give unintelligent creatures with keen hearing or sense of smell the equivalent of intelligence to reflect detection of invisible creatures. Check each round the creature is exposed to invisibility. Once detected, the invisible creature will be kept track of thereafter, as the detector will be able to note the cause. Any attacks incur the -4 penalty of attacking an invisible opponent, of course, and the invisible creature likewise is entitled to +4 on saving throws. So, I mean, maybe this wouldn't come up too much if you're mostly fighting lower level creatures or just dumb ones, but if you're fighting a bunch of smart creatures, they're going to be rolling these percentage chances pretty frequently, right? Check every round to see if they notice you. So basically, after a couple of rounds, someone is going to notice you, which is kind of a bummer. I mean, in a fight, the invisibility would turn off anyway, but if you're trying to sneak by them or something like that, that's not a lot of fun. What's the point of invisibility anyway? Rules for mirrors. It is important for DMs to remember that in order to be reflective, a mirror must have a light source. All right, thanks, Gary. Detection of evil and or good. It is important to make a distinction between character alignment and some powerful force of evil or good when this detection function is considered. In general, only a no alignment spell will determine the evil or good a character holds within. It must be a great evil or a strong good to be detected. Characters who are very strongly aligned do not stray from their faith, and who are of relatively high level, at least 8 or higher, might radiate good or evil if they are intent upon appropriate actions. Powerful monsters such as demons, devils, Kirin, and the like will send forth emanations of their evil or good. Aligned undead must radiate evil, for it is this power and negative force which enables them to continue existing. Note that none of these emanations are noticeable without magical detection. In like fashion, powerful magic items which have some purpose as respects alignment will radiate evil or good, unless they are aligned with neutrality, which is neither, of course. Most other magic items will most certainly not, even though their effects might be for evil or good. Likewise, items which are not magical but which have powerful effects will probably not give any evil or good aura. Poison is a prime example. It is perfectly neutral and has no aura whatsoever. Unholy water will emanate evil, just as holy water will radiate good. Places sanctified to some deity of evil or good will certainly give off an appropriate aura. Thus, a trap, for example, is neutral and gives no evil or good reading. If some trap leads victims to the lair of Jubilex, for example, there will be an aura of evil about it, while if it brings victims into the realm of Bahamut, it will send forth an aura of good. Using these guidelines, you should have little difficulty in adjudicating the attempts of characters empowered to detect evil or good to do so. As a side note, be sure to remember that all such detection requires not less than 1 round of stillness and concentration, whether the power is from some inner source, paladins, for example, or by some external means, spells, swords, etc. Therefore, the character must stop, have quiet, and intently seek to detect the aura. Rules for listening at doors. In addition to the simple exercise of observation, many times characters will desire to listen, ear pressed to a portal, prior to opening and entering. This requires a special check, in secret, by you to determine if any sound is heard. Because of this, continual listening becomes a great bother to the DM. While ear seekers will tend to discourage some, most players will insist on having their characters listen at doors at every pretense. First, make certain that you explain to players that all headgear must be removed in order to listen. Those wearing helmets will probably have to remove a male coif and padded cap as well, don't forget. The party must also be absolutely silent, and listening will take at least 1 round. Silent creatures, undead, bugbears, etc., will never be heard. All right. Sleeping or resting or alerted creatures will not be heard either. Even alerted creatures, I guess they'd be standing quietly. If there is something for the listener to hear behind the door, the following probabilities will determine if any sound is heard. So it has by race right here. So dwarves hear 2 in 20, elves 3 in 20. Really, it's pretty low chances. It's like 10%, 20% at the most for gnomes. Keen-eared individuals will gain a bonus of 1 or 2 in 20, 5% or 10%. Use chance of hearing a noise to determine if a character is keen-eared the first time he or she listens at a door, and if it is indicated, tell the player to note the fact on his or her character. Player characters will not initially have hearing problems, as they wouldn't have survived if they had them. During the course of adventuring, great noise might cause hearing loss. Handle this as you see fit. A loss of hearing might negate the chance to hear something behind a door without any other noticeable effects. Hearing noise. When a die roll indicates a noise has been heard, tell the player whose character was listening that he or she heard a clink, footsteps, murmuring voices, slithering, laughter, or whatever is appropriate. Of course, some of these noises will be magical, e.g., audible glamour spells, not anything which would be encountered at all. Be imprecise and give only vague hints. Never say, you hear ogres, but you hear rumbling, voice-like sounds. Failure to hear any noise can be due to the fact that nothing which will make noise is beyond the portal, or it might be due to a bad, for the listener, die roll. Always roll the die, even if you know nothing can be heard. Always appear disinterested, regardless of the situation. Maximum number of listeners. Each listener can take up about 2.5 feet of space, so up to 3 can listen at a typical dungeon door. This is kind of funny because dungeon doors they're pretty wide because they often take up about a whole square, which in AD&D, like I said, is 10 feet. So I guess if you include like the portals on or the pillars on each side is maybe 8 feet wide, something like that, which is really wide. That's a door that's just enormous. So I think someone at one point drew a picture of what a typical AD&D door looked like, and it's very strange looking. Maximum length of time for listening. Only 3 attempts can be made before the strain becomes too great. After the 3rd attempt, listeners must cease such activity for at least 5 rounds before continuing to listen again. I've never thought that listening for something was much of a strain, but there you go. Our next section is combat, and this is going to be, I'm sure, a very substantial section going through all of Gary's thoughts on how to run fights in AD&D. Sure enough, it is quite detailed as you would expect. So I think we will leave this for our next issue of reading the whole AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, and also my voice is giving out a little bit. So thanks for watching, everyone, and listening along with me. Let me know in the comments below if you thought this was fun and you want to keep doing them, you want to keep listening to these. I know some people listen to them as podcasts or just while they're doing something else, which is perfectly fine. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time. And thanks especially to all of our patrons over on Patreon who helped support the channel over the last month. These are some of our newest patrons. Thank you so much, guys, for supporting the channel. I couldn't be doing this without you. All right, see you guys later.